It arrived without a sender. No return address. No stamp that made sense. Just one word written in fading ink across the envelope. Yours. Inside, a letter from a man who died over 100 years ago. Addressed to someone he could never have known. You. But that's only the beginning. Because what if love didn't follow the rules of time? What if a voice could travel through decades? Not to haunt, but to remember. And what if, once you read the letter, something in your world changed? This is the story of Nora and Elias, two strangers separated by a century, bound by words no one was supposed to find, a ghost train, a forbidden romance, a veil between worlds so thin you can almost feel it. And once you begin, there's no going back. The library had always been quiet, but today, the silence was different. It wasn't just the hush of pages turning or footsteps softened by old carpet. It was the kind of silence that feels like breath held in a dark room. Nora Callahan, the head archivist, knew the rhythm of this place like a heartbeat. She could tell the hour by the way light moved across the marble floor, or sense a visitor before they reached her desk. But today, something felt off, as if the building was waiting for something, or someone. It was late afternoon. The sun was bleeding gold through the high windows. Nora was in the restricted section, sliding a worn copy of letters from a Victorian traveler back into its place on the shelf. As she did, two books shifted slightly, and something thin slipped from between them, fluttering down like a leaf. An envelope, cream-colored, sealed, and strangely untouched. No dust, no wear, no crinkle at the corners like the other documents she handled every day. She crouched, picked it up carefully, and turned it over in her gloved hands. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used over a century ago. She read the stamp once, then again, postmarked. December 11th, 1897. But that wasn't what made her breath catch in her throat. It had last week's date printed by the courier service, neatly labeled in ink, delivered to Glendale Public Library Special Collections Desk. But there had been no deliveries last week. She had been here every hour the library was open. No packages, no visitors to that section, no couriers, and the envelope, addressed to someone who never worked here. A name she didn't recognize. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb, Curator of Memories. Nora furrowed her brow. There was no Curator of Memories at the library. There never had been. He checked the database. Nothing. Searched archives. Nothing. Searched the internet. Nothing. Not even an obituary or old census listing. And still, the envelope sat in her hand. Pristine, eerie, and impossibly real. Her fingertips tingled. Maybe it was the dust in the air. Maybe it was the chill that suddenly crept over her shoulders. But the moment she cracked the wax seal, the library lights dimmed for just a second. Flicker. A breath of cold. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single folded sheet, written in elegant, almost hauntingly beautiful cursive. Ink so dark it looked wet. Lines pressed deeply into the paper, as if written with urgency, with emotion. Began. To you who finds this, if I have timed it right, you are reading this in a world I could only imagine. My name is Elias Thorne, and I write this from beyond the veil of memory. Not quite the dead, not quite the living. Somewhere in between. Nora blinked. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat at the nearest table and began to read aloud. I do not know what year you're in, only that I've been told this letter would travel, not through rail or horse, but through something far more peculiar, longing, that if I poured every memory I had into this page, it might find its way to you. I do not know your face, but I have seen your shadow in dreams. A girl with ink-stained fingers, surrounded by the scent of forgotten stories. You walk among books as if they speak. You find things others bury. I don't ask you to believe me, only to listen. Nora's chest felt tight. The air around her had shifted. Her breath formed mist, just faintly in the dimming light. She read on, pulled deeper by every line. I was a watchmaker's son. I lived in Whitcomb Hollow, a town now likely erased by time. My life was quiet, measured, until the day the train crashed. It was winter, cold enough to steal your breath. I had boarded the 7:22 to deliver a timepiece to the station master in Kestrel's End. But halfway through the journey, the snow thickened. A fog like smoke wrapped the world, and the train, it derailed. Some say it was the brakes. Some say it was sabotage. I say it was something else. Because in that moment I saw her, a woman standing by the tracks. Not dressed for 1897, wrapped in strange fabric, with light in her eyes that didn't match the century. She looked straight at me. She whispered something I still hear in my dreams. And then everything stopped. I woke 2 days later, broken, changed, haunted. Nora clutched the letter tighter. There were no such accidents recorded in the region in 1897. She would have known. She knew every major event that touched this town's soil. But the name Elias Thorne echoed. She had heard it once before, in a ghost story told to her as a child by her grandmother. A man who vanished, a train that no longer ran, a letter that never reached its destination. Her grandmother had laughed afterward, said it was just something old women whispered to make children sleep with the lights on. But this letter, it wasn't a story, it was alive. She turned back to the page. I began to write after that, feverishly, as if someone was guiding my hand. I wrote of cities I had never seen, technology one had no name for, and always, I wrote to you, 'cause you were there. I saw your face in the snow and I knew I had loved you once, or would love you in a time neither of us could reach. They say the soul remembers. That time is not a line but a river. I believe mine ran parallel to yours, just long enough to glimpse you. And maybe this letter is foolish. Maybe it will rot in the earth. But if by some miracle it finds you, please tell me if I was real. Nora stopped breathing for a moment. She turned the final fold, expecting the letter to end there. But there was a PS, and it chilled her to the bone. There was a garden behind your childhood home, lavender and rosemary. Your mother used to sing as she watered the plants. She believed the dead could smell the flowers if you sang to them. You buried your bird there when you were 7. Finch. You named her Marigold. No one else saw you cry. Nora's blood turned to ice. That was true. Every word. The garden. The sun. Marigold. A tiny finch with a broken wing she had nursed back to health for 3 weeks before it died in her hands. No one had ever known her name. Not even her father. She had whispered it in secret under the stars. And she had cried alone, curled up behind the shed, away from everyone. The letter dropped from her fingers. She stood up slowly, looked around. The lights buzzed slightly overhead. No one was there, but she could feel something. Presence, touching, waiting. She picked the letter back up and walked. No, ran to the front desk. She wanted to check the security cameras, see if someone had planted the letter. Maybe a cruel joke, maybe something else. But the footage showed nothing. No delivery. No one in that wing of the library for 3 days. She printed a still from the moment she found it, froze the frame. In the corner of the shot, behind the shelf, a figure stood, faint, blurred, dressed in dark coat and hat, watching her. Gone in the next frame. Nora sat back in her chair, the photo trembling in her hands. Who was Elias Thorne? How did he know her? Why did he write to a stranger across a century? And how had he known where to find her? She looked again at the envelope. The seal was unbroken before she opened it. The ink hadn't faded. The scent of the paper was old, but not aged, like it had skipped time entirely. And yet, the fear in her chest wasn't cold. It was warm, like recognition, like remembering something she hadn't lived yet. She tucked the letter into a locked drawer, though part of her felt it was pointless. If it wanted to be found, it would be. She didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling, repeating the letter in her mind, repeating his name. And just before dawn, she sat up. reached into her coat pocket for her keys, and pulled out another envelope. Same handwriting, same seal. No one had placed it there. She would have felt it. But there it was, dated one day after the first, and postmarked from a hospital that had burned down in 1902. It was after midnight when Nora finally stepped through the door of her small apartment on the third floor of a quiet red brick building that had stood longer than most things in town. The kind of place where time didn't move fast, where floors creaked with memory and the air always carried a faint scent of old wood, tea, and books left open. But tonight, something followed her in. She didn't hear it. She didn't see it. She felt it. The air was heavier, the silence more deliberate. She hadn't told anyone about the letter, not even her closest friend. Felt like something too sacred, too strange to explain. Even she hadn't made sense of it yet. And now, in the safety of her apartment, she held the second envelope in both hands. The one that had somehow slipped into her coat pocket without her knowledge. It hadn't been there when she left the library. She was sure of that. But as she pulled off her coat, it had fluttered to the floor. Same handwriting, same wax seal, the same unmistakable scent of something old, something once living. And this time, it was addressed to her directly. Miss Nora Callahan, keeper of things remembered. Name. Not a guess, not a coincidence. He knew her. She lit a single lamp on the corner table. The soft amber glow illuminated the room with gentle warmth, casting long shadows on the walls. She sat on the edge of her armchair and slowly opened the letter. The moment the wax broke, the light in the room flickered. Once, then again, then dimmed. The shadows grew longer. The corners of the room seemed to pull away slightly, as if space itself was adjusting. She looked up. Nothing moved. No windows were open. No draft. Only her breath in the air. Slightly visible now. And the letter in her hand, waiting to speak. She began to read. My dearest Nora, forgive me for the way this letter must reach you. I do not know what rules I am breaking, or what gods I offend by writing across the seams of time. But I could not leave things unsaid. I have waited through lifetimes to speak your name. You do not remember me. How could you? But I remember you. In dreams. In fragments. In moments stolen from a life I never lived. You were there the day the train derailed. You were standing on the platform, wearing a scarf the color of rain. You were impossible. Your clothing, your eyes, the way you stared directly at me while everyone else screamed. You were the last thing I saw before the carriage broke from the tracks and turned to iron and fire. Nora stopped. Her hands trembled. She hadn't told anyone about the scarf she wore that day. The day she visited the rail yard ruins after finding the first letter. A pale gray scarf with soft blue threading, like rain. No one had seen her. She kept reading. When I woke, I was not the same. They say the body heals, but the soul does not forget what it glimpsed between heartbeats. I began to write. Every letter I composed found its way into strange hands. Some burned, some vanished, and still I wrote. Always to you. I did not know your name until I saw it in a vision. Nora. It echoed through the walls of my fever. A name meant to be whispered, not shouted. A name that steadied my hand. They told me the train crash never happened. Said I was delusional. That no such tragedy ever occurred. But I remember. I remember the metal screaming. I remember the windows exploding like glass rain. I remember the man beside me. His wristwatch frozen at 7:36. I remember. You. Nora froze. A wristwatch. Her grandfather's watch, the one she found in the attic after his funeral, was stopped at exactly 7:36. She had kept it in her drawer for years. It had never ticked again, no matter how many times she tried to fix it. Her stomach turned. She looked across the room at the drawer where it rested. Closed. Will. He pressed on. You're reading this now, I hope. I don't know if this will find you in 1990 or 2090. I don't know if the world still reads letters. But if it finds you, then time still bends for us. They say a soul that remembers too much becomes unstable. Feel it. Each night I forget more of who I am. Each morning I recall things I should never know. The future tastes like smoke and silver. Your name keeps me whole. If this reaches you, Nora, then I never truly died. Elias. Then, silence. The paper in her hands felt heavier than before. Her heartbeat filled the room. She hadn't noticed how loud it had grown. She stood up. The lights flickered again. But this time they didn't return to full strength. The room was dusky, as if something unseen was pressing gently against the edges of reality. Nora walked to the drawer, opened it. There, next to the old wristwatch, lay a third letter. Identical. Same paper. Same seal. But this time it hadn't fallen. She hadn't brought it. Hadn't touched it. It was simply there. And something inside her, something deeper than reason or fear, whispered that it had always been there. Waiting. Patient. Ancient. She reached for it and paused. How could Elias know her name? Her scarf. The bird from her childhood. How could he write as if he knew her? Not just in memory, but in longing. And why did his words feel familiar? As if somewhere, in a place dreams are born and forgotten, she had once written them herself. She went to her kitchen, poured a cup of water with shaking hands, and returned to her chair. The second letter lay on the table. The third one still in the drawer, untouched. She read the last line again. If this reaches you, then time still bends for us. There was something terrifying about those words. Not because of the mystery, but because of the hope buried inside them. The kind of hope that made people wait at windows. That made lovers write letters across oceans. Hope that refused to die, even when time tried to bury it. And what terrified Nora most was that she wanted it to be true. She wanted Elias to be real. Because something in her life had always felt like a puzzle missing a piece. Not broken, just waiting. And now, somehow, this man from 1897 was writing pieces into her hands. She stood at the window and looked out over the city. Lights flickered far below. A tram rolled quietly down the hill. Someone laughed in the distance. Dog barked. All of it felt so now, so real, so ordinary. And yet, she felt like a ghost behind glass. A woman caught between chapters. Character in someone else's story. Maybe Elias felt the same. She reached into the drawer. Her fingers brushed the third letter. And again, the lights flickered. This time she heard something. A whisper. Distant. Echoing. Name. Not from outside. Not from the hallway. From the walls. From the letter. She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The letter sat on the table. She didn't open it. Not yet. It felt like an hourglass waiting to be turned. The moment she broke the seal, something would shift again. At 4:17 a.m., she turned on the lamp again. The shadows had lengthened. She checked her coat just in case. A strange thought came to her. Was there anything else hiding? She shook the coat out. Me. Then she reached into the inner pocket. Her fingers touched something. Another envelope. Smaller. Older. Folded twice. This one wasn't sealed with wax. It was stitched shut with a single red thread. Nora stared at it for a long time. Because this envelope smelled like lavender and smoke. Her grandmother's scent. And for a brief moment, she remembered something she hadn't thought of in 20 years. Her grandmother once told her a bedtime story. About a train that ran once every 50 years. A train that took passengers who didn't belong to their own time. She'd thought it was just a tale. But she wasn't so sure. She pressed the stitched letter to her chest, listening to the silence of the apartment. But it wasn't silent anymore. The world was humming. Low, quiet, beneath the floorboards and within the walls. Like the turning of gears. The shifting of time. Heartbeat not her own. And she realized she wasn't alone. Not in her apartment. Not in her life. Something was watching, not with eyes, but with memory, and it was waiting. It was still dark when Nora finally peeled the third letter open. Her apartment was quiet except for the steady tick of her grandfather's stopped watch, though it hadn't ticked in 20 years. The sound now was faint, like a memory pretending to be real. She didn't move when she heard it. She didn't breathe, because she already knew this letter would change everything. The paper was thinner this time, its edges uneven, as though it had been torn from a hospital journal or field notes. The ink was lighter too, as if written by a trembling hand. And at the top of the page, in that same old-world handwriting, was a date. December 12, 1897. Exactly 1 day after the first letter. This one began without any formal greeting. Started like a gasp. They told me I wouldn't survive the night. But the night came and went. And here I am, stitched together by science I do not understand, and haunted by a woman I should never have seen. Nora exhaled slowly. The tremble in her chest returned, but this time it felt heavier. The words weren't just poetic. They sounded frantic, raw, pulled straight from the edge of death. She read on. They say I was found on the embankment, unconscious, burned. But not from fire. From something colder, something like frostbite on the soul. The doctors do not know what to make of me. One said my lungs were filled with ash, but I had no smoke around me. Another said my pulse flickered, not like a man dying, but like someone flickering between places. They asked me to describe the crash. Could not. What I remember most clearly is her. You. Nora's throat tightened. I saw you standing at the station. Not among the wreckage, but apart from it. Watching, not running. The others screamed. You didn't move. And around you, a silver glimmer, like the outline of something drawn in moonlight. I knew then that time hadn't chosen a side. Not yet. And you were not just real. You were meant. Tell me if this reaches you. Was I alive or already gone? The letter paused. Space left blank. As though Elias had faltered. As though his hand had refused to go on until he'd remembered how to breathe. Nora touched the paper. Felt warm. Not from her hands. From within. She whispered the next line aloud. The nurses say I speak your name in my sleep. Nora. Nora. Over and over. As though you were the thread keeping me tethered. They don't know who you are. Neither do I. Not truly. But you've become more than memory. You've become gravity. I don't understand what is happening to me. I only know this. When I close my eyes, I see a city I have never walked. Tower of glass. Machines that sing. Roads filled with lights like stars pulled to earth. And I see you among it all, walking like a ghost who doesn't know she's haunting. Nora pressed a hand to her chest. Her heart hurt, not in fear, not in confusion, in recognition. She had always felt displaced, as if something inside her memory didn't match the world around her, as if part of her soul had once lived in sepia tones and candlelight. And now this man, Elias, this ghost, this survivor of something the world refused to acknowledge, was writing to her as if they were halves of the same unfinished thought. She turned the page. They will not let me write again. They say it is not good for me. They want me to forget what I saw. But how do you forget the sound of your name on the wind, carried across a century? If you're reading this, Nora, then something broke open, and the pieces are reaching for each other. I do not know if I'll wake again, but I will write one more time before the fever takes me. And if you do find this, I beg you, do not follow the silver path. Not yet, not unless you're certain, because once you begin to remember, time will no longer protect you. It will hunt you. Nora stopped. The room felt colder, not a chill, a pressure like the weight of too many clocks ticking at once. And she realized something. The radiator hadn't made a sound in over an hour. The air was still, as if the walls were holding their breath. She folded the letter gently and placed it next to the first. She didn't know what to do with the stitched one yet. The envelope that smelled of lavender and smoke, the one that whispered of her grandmother's bedtime stories and forgotten truths. Her fingers hovered over it, then pulled away. Tonight, her dreams came differently. They weren't dreams. They were memories she had never lived. She stood at a train platform soaked in fog. The tracks stretched out ahead like veins, vanishing into mist. No buildings, no sound, just cold air and silence that hummed. She looked down at her hands. They weren't hers. They were gloved, laced with delicate fabric. Victorian gloves. A voice behind her murmured something she didn't understand. A turn. No one there. Then the whistle. Not a modern one. The low, aching cry of an iron locomotive, chugging through the mist. Too slow for now, too fast for then. The train appeared like a phantom, wheels grinding sparks on tracks that looked cracked with age. Its windows were black, big, and inside shadows moved. One figure stepped forward. She saw a man, just barely. His hand touched the glass. He mouthed her name. She didn't hear it. She felt it, like a bell ringing deep in the marrow of her bones. She reached toward him and fell into smoke, into sound. Nora sat bolt upright in bed, breathing hard. The clock read 5:12 a.m. The sky outside was still blue with sleep, and her hands were stained black. Coal dust caked under her nails, in the lines of her palms. She stumbled to the sink, scrubbing them raw, but the smell lingered. She looked into the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Her own face shimmered just slightly, like water disturbed by breath. He turned away. A letter. She needed to read the stitched one. She couldn't wait. She brought it to the table, held it beneath the lamp. The thread was delicate, a soft red silk that looked faded by tears. She didn't use scissors. She pulled it slowly, one tug at a time. Inside was a folded paper and a dried flower, pressed flat and fragile. Lavender. The note was shorter than the others, but the handwriting wasn't Elias's. It was smaller, neater, feminine. She unfolded it and read the first line. He is not what you think he is. The signature at the bottom was a name she'd never seen. Margaret Thorne. The stitched letter from Margaret Thorne sat on Nora's kitchen table, motionless, yet louder than anything else in the room. He is not what you think he is. That single sentence repeated in her head like the turning of train wheels in the dark. She didn't sleep after reading it. She didn't eat. She didn't shower. All she could think of was platform 6.5, a place that didn't exist on any modern map, yet had already taken shape in her dreams. By noon, Nora was standing inside the city archives, holding a brittle folder labeled Transit, 1890s. Decommissioned lines. Dust scattered like ghost breath each time she turned a page. Faded ink. Water-stained maps. Names of stations long buried beneath shopping malls and parking garages. And then she saw it. Not on the main chart, but scratched faintly in the margin of an engineer's notebook. Platform 6.5. Active only in fog. Do not enter without brass key. Nora's mouth went dry. No train platform is labeled with a fraction. They're numbered. Whole numbers. Functional. Rational. But this was something else. She dug deeper, flipping through the records with trembling fingers. One ledger mentioned a disappearance. December 1897. Elias Thorne, age 28. Presumed dead in industrial accident. Train derailment en route to Kestrel's End. She stared at it, eyes wide. Presumed, not confirmed. No body recovered. The note beside it said, last seen boarding at platform 6.5. She pressed her hand to the page, as if touch could pull more truth from it. Outside, the clouds began to gather. 2 hours later, she sat across from an old man in a railway retirement home. Albert Finch. Memory not what it used to be. But his hands were steady, and his eyes had that far-off gleam that only comes from a lifetime spent watching steel and fog collide. He sipped his tea slowly as she explained what she'd found. He didn't interrupt, just listened. Then, after a long pause, he said, you shouldn't be digging into platform 6.5, missy. That place. It finds you when it's ready, not before. Nora leaned forward. You've seen it. He smiled faintly. Once, long ago, I was just a porter then. Maybe 19, maybe 20. Was foggy as sin. You couldn't see your own boots. That was the rule. The fog had to be thick. And I saw it. He stared at the table, eyes going glassy. The platform just appeared. Between 6 and 7. Like a crease in the world. Man stood there. Gloves. Staring straight ahead. Not waiting for a train. Waiting for something else. Someone. Nora barely breathed. What happened? Albert's fingers twitched slightly. He walked down the track. Fog swallowed him. No train came. And when I blinked, the platform was gone. She whispered. Was his name Elias? Albert's eyes met hers. He nodded slowly. I never told anyone that name, but I remember it. It was carved into the wood railing. 80, December 1897. That night, Nora walked the entire length of the old train yard. Her boots crunched across broken gravel and rusted rails. The station had long been condemned, overgrown with ivy, the roof sagging like an old man's spine. She counted each platform, 1 through 6, and then, base. Not a number, but a gap, no markings, just an oddly shaped stone foundation, the exact width of a platform, overgrown and forgotten. She stood on it. A sudden gust of wind stirred the fog into movement. It rolled around her ankles like a living thing, curling and hissing along the edges of the past. The air thickened, something shimmered, and then from the dark a sound. Not a train, not a voice, but a hum. Low, vibrating, like the world itself holding its breath. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers touched something she hadn't placed there. Paper. Back in her apartment, she unwrapped the newest letter slowly. No wax seal this time. No stitched thread. Just aged paper folded with care, placed gently, impossibly, inside her locked mailbox. There was no sign of tampering. The mailbox had a digital lock. It wasn't broken. No scratches. No forced entry. But the letter was there, waiting. And it began with a line that nearly made her drop it. You stepped on the platform, didn't you? She sank into her chair. The handwriting was shakier than before. More rushed, ink blotting in places. The words came feverishly, like a man running out of time. You felt it. The moment between seconds. The breath between bells. That's where the platform lives. I've tried to reach you again and again, but they're watching now. The ones who don't want us to remember. They're not men. They're custodians. They sweep away connections like dust. They erase letters, burn pages, twist memories until only shadows remain. But we were stronger than time. Once. Nora's breath hitched. Her heart thudded. This didn't feel like fantasy anymore. This felt like history fighting to be remembered. The next paragraph chilled her. Do you remember the night you wandered off as a child? You were 5. Your mother was asleep. You walked to the old train tracks. You don't remember why. Only that someone was there. That was me. I wasn't supposed to reach you then, but I did. And they punished me. Her mouth went dry. She did remember that night. She had never told anyone. She'd woken up with her socks blackened from soot, her hands cold, and a bruise on her arm she couldn't explain. She had chalked it up to childhood imagination. Till now. She turned to the final part of the letter. I don't know how much longer I'll remember your name. They're pulling it from me, one letter at a time. But every time you step onto that platform, you bring us closer. Closer to something they cannot erase. I need you to find the watchmaker's ledger. It's hidden in the wall behind Locker 9 at the old Glenford station. They never searched there. Contains the map. The real one. The one with the doors. Then, scribbled faintly in the corner, as though added later in haste. She lied, Nora. Margaret. She was one of them. She was the first. The letter ended there. No signature. No date. Just the scent of iron and lavender. As if two truths were trying to occupy the same place. Nora stared at her reflection in the window. Her own face looked distant, less like a woman reading a mystery, and more like someone becoming one. She knew what she had to do next. She had to find the ledger. She had to see Locker 9, even if it meant chasing shadows, even if it meant stepping fully into the place between moments. She turned away from the window, not noticing the reflection lingered just a second longer than she did. The fog outside Nora's window hadn't lifted in 2 days. It crawled along the edges of buildings, clung to railings and chimneys, and pressed quietly against her windows like a patient thing. The kind that didn't knock. The kind that waited. Inside, the apartment was warmer, softer, though not by much. The radiators groaned like tired voices, and the air smelled faintly of paper and candle wax. On her table sat the newest letter, folded and opened. She had stared at it for 3 hours before daring to break the seal. Something about it felt heavier than the others. Not physically, but emotionally. As if this letter had been written not in ink, but in grief. When she opened it, the scent hit her first. A strange mix of coal smoke and something faintly electric, like ozone after a lightning strike. The first line was scrawled in a hurried hand. "I heard you whisper in the fog." Nora read aloud without realizing. The sound of her voice trembled through the quiet. "You said my name like it still mattered. You said it softly. So softly I thought it might have been the wind. But it was you. I felt it. I think. I'm beginning to hear more than I should. See more than I should. The veil is thinner now. And every time I sleep, your world bleeds into mine." The letter was less elegant than the others. Words were scratched out, rewritten. The strokes jittered across the page like the hand that held the pen had grown unsure or overwhelmed. But the emotion was unmistakable. Honest, yearning. Nora kept reading. "There was a moment last night where I stood on the edge of something. I don't know what it was. Not a room, not a dream. It was in between. A place between breath and memory. You were there. I saw your hands reaching for books that hadn't been written. Shelves made of glass and light. A bird made of metal flew over us, roaring like thunder. You turned, and for one brief second I saw your eyes, older than before, tired, but still searching." Nora's throat closed. She had dreamt of that moment the night before. She had been shelving books in the library's digital wing, a part of her job she barely thought about. But in the dream, everything was off. Too silent, too bright. And a bird, or something shaped like one, had passed overhead. Its shadow had stretched impossibly long. She had thought it was just her mind playing tricks. But now Elias had described it. Exactly. "Tell me, Nora, is this madness? Or memory? Am I hallucinating your world, or remembering it? There was a window in my hospital room today. I swear to you, for a moment I saw something strange outside. Not a tree, not a horse or cart, but a thing made of wheels and steel. A car, I believe you call it. And a man walked past holding a glowing square to his ear, speaking into it. No cord, no wires, just light and voice. Your world is bleeding through me. And every time it does, I lose something of my own." The paper shook in Nora's hands. She wasn't just receiving letters. She was being remembered, or maybe being dreamt. She turned the page. "I am not well, Nora. My bones ache with futures I cannot hold. I coughed blood this morning, but it wasn't red. It shimmered like mercury or broken mirror, and my reflection no longer matches my face. I looked into the mirror by my bed and saw a man I did not know. His eyes were yours. I'm afraid, not of dying, but of forgetting you. There are men in white coats. They whisper when they think I sleep. They say I speak of libraries and flying machines, that I must be studied. I believe they are the custodians, or worse, the ones Margaret serves, the ones who erase." Nora's pulse quickened. Margaret, his wife, or perhaps something else entirely. He had said she lied. But why? The letter continued. "There was a book in my lap this morning. I do not know where it came from. It was blank, but the cover read, "The Book of Remembering." When I opened it, a single word appeared on the page. Nora. And then it vanished. I touched the page again. A second word appeared, "Come." Nora stood. She didn't realize she'd done it. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She was breathing hard now. The candle flickered wildly. She turned to the last part of the letter. The writing had grown erratic, smudged, rushed. Some words were barely legible. "I'm writing this not from my room anymore. They moved me. Somewhere underground. I hear metal creaking. I smell dust and oil. And clocks. Always clocks. I found a mirror here. Carved into the wall. It shows things. Not reflections, but warnings. I saw you again. You were standing at a station. Not yours, not mine, but both. The fog swallowed you. You said my name. And then you said, asterisk, asterisk." The letter ended there. Mid-sentence. Single dash. No period. No signature. Just silence. Nora stared at the bottom of the page, confused. Why would he stop there? Had someone taken the page? Interrupted him? She turned the letter over. Nothing. She held it to the light. Still blank. But something nudged her. Something old and quiet, like instinct or memory or both. She tilted the letter sideways, just slightly. And something shimmered. Faint words began to bleed through the fibers of the paper. Not in Elias's script, but in hers. Familiar looping handwriting. Her own. The words were soft, almost invisible, like breath trapped in parchment. They read, "I hear you too, Elias. I've always heard you. I just didn't know it was you." Nora staggered back. She hadn't written that, had she? She looked around the room. Me. But it didn't feel empty. She whispered aloud, "Elias, what are we?" And from the hallway, far beyond her locked door, something whispered back. Not a voice, not a word, just a sound, like a train in the fog waiting to arrive. It was nearly dawn when Nora noticed the mirror. Small circular one, framed in tarnished brass, hung above the fireplace, though she hadn't paid it any mind in months. It was an antique, inherited from her grandmother's old cottage, a relic with spiderweb cracks in the corner and a surface that no longer reflected light evenly. She'd always meant to take it down, but something always stopped her. This morning, she stared into it longer than usual, because the letter, the one from Elias that had ended mid-sentence, was still in her hand. And the ink, though dry, glimmered ever so faintly under the glass when she passed it beneath the mirror's edge. Her fingers paused. Shimmer. Faint text bled through. Not visible by candlelight or lamplight. Only reflected. Only reversed. She pressed the page flat against the table and angled the mirror downward. The room felt colder the moment the words appeared, as if they didn't want to be seen. Ghost-like text began to form in the reverse reflection. Fragile. 5 words. "Meet me where the tracks disappear." She whispered them aloud, and the moment she did, the mirror cracked further. A single line stretching from top to bottom, as if the glass itself had flinched. Nora stood still. That phrase, those words, they weren't just poetic. They were specific. Place. A destination only Elias would have known. Platform 6.5. The one that shouldn't exist. The one that waited. She didn't change clothes. She didn't grab breakfast. She threw on her coat, shoved the letter into her satchel, and left the apartment before the sun had even climbed the horizon. The rail yard had always been silent, but today silence became something more. Twatch. The fog was back, thick and low to the ground. It curled around her boots and swallowed the gravel beneath her feet. The sky above was flat and colorless. No longer morning, not quite night. Just gray. She moved past the rusted signs, the broken fence, and the skeletal remnants of once functional platforms. When she arrived at the stone foundation of platform 6.5, the world changed. Her phone screen blinked, flickered, and died. No warning. No battery alert. Just darkness. She tapped it, held the power button. Nothing. Nora looked around. Even the birds had gone quiet. She stepped onto the cracked concrete and moved toward the far end, where tracks once stretched toward the horizon but now vanished under overgrowth and soil. The place where the rails simply stopped. That was where she felt it. Shift. Pull. The kind of sensation you get when a stranger says your name and you turn before realizing you never told them who you were. And then the mirror. She hadn't seen it before. A long shard nailed crudely to a wall of crumbling brick. Bent. Reflecting nothing but gray mist. She stepped closer and saw something missing. Her reflection. No silhouette. No flicker of motion. Just mist in the glass. Her breath caught. She turned her head, trying to see the angle. But no matter how she moved, the mirror refused her image. And then a voice. Not Elias's. A woman's. Echoing. From deep inside the tunnel beyond the broken wall. Don't meet him. The sound didn't come from any direction she could pinpoint. It circled her, like the fog, like the wind. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. The voice came again. He died for a reason. Let the dead stay lost. Nora's knees trembled. The fog thickened, curling upward like smoke from unseen fires. Another sound echoed faintly, the distant clink of metal on metal, like train wheels over rails that hadn't existed for 100 years. And then, bench. It hadn't been there before. Wooden, worn, and resting on it. A small parcel, wrapped in soft, faded cloth, burgundy, laced with gold trim. 18th century textile. Too old to be here. Too perfect to be untouched. Nora approached, hands shaking. She touched the parcel. Warm. Not from the sun, there was no sun. Not from her breath. The air was too cold. But the cloth felt alive. As if it had been held moments before by someone who hadn't yet left the space it occupied. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a letter. Sealed with wax the color of dried blood. And something else. Small ornate key. Brass. Delicately carved. She turned it in her fingers. It was engraved. Not with numbers, but with a word. Remember. She unfolded the letter and began to read. Nora, I hope this reaches you before they do. The tunnel is a gate, not a path. What lies beyond is not linear. It is memory made real. Ghosts made skin. The veil was never meant to hold forever. I remember you, not just from the station, but from before. Before the accident. Before the fog. You walked into my shop. You asked for a timepiece shaped like a heartbeat. You said it was for someone who had forgotten how to wait. I never told you this, but I finished it. Carved your name into the gears. And the moment I wound it, the clocks around me stopped. I think that was when it all began. Nora felt her own heartbeat stutter. A memory flickered in her mind. Fractured, distant. Storefront. A small bell ringing. Her voice, younger. Asking a man with soft eyes for a watch that could keep time not by seconds, but by feeling. She pressed her palm to her chest. Had it been real? Had she met him before? She read on. They've kept me here, Nora. Between rooms that echo and corridors that hum. Time has folded around me like paper. I see your face in the folds. If you find the mirror that doesn't see you, you're close. But be warned, not all who appear human are. Not all voices come from truth. There is a woman who wears my wife's face. She walks the halls of this place. She says she loved me, but her eyes are made of mirrors. She wants to bring you here, to trap you in the reflection. Trust no one without shadow. If the key is still warm when you hold it, it means you're almost through. But you must remember, once the tracks disappear, the world no longer listens. The letter ended with coordinates, latitudes and longitudes. She scribbled them down. They pointed to a place far north, past the edge of the city, past even the old maps, somewhere the modern world had forgotten. Nora wrapped the letter again, clutching the key. She turned back toward the mirror. This time her reflection had returned, but it didn't match her. Not completely. It blinked slower, moved just after she did. Its eyes were tired, not sad, not scared, just old, worn by waiting. And in its hand, the reflection's hand, was a brass pocket watch, ticking, one beat too fast. She reached out to touch the glass. The mirror shimmered, then cracked down the center. The fourth letter arrived differently. No stamp, no seal, no scent of age or ash. It wasn't found on a bench or slipped into a mailbox or wrapped in velvet cloth. It was simply there, placed gently on her pillow. Nora had locked the door, deadbolt and chain. She lived on the 3rd floor, and her windows hadn't been opened in weeks. And yet, the letter waited for her, centered perfectly, as if whoever left it had stood there, watching her sleep. But it wasn't fear that chilled her as she picked it up. It was sadness. The envelope was unsealed. The paper inside creased at the corners. Elias's handwriting, once elegant, controlled, precise, now trembled across the page like a man walking barefoot through snow. The first words looked lost, like someone trying to remember how language works. Dear N. Nora. Nor. Scratched out. Then again. Nora. Yes, Nora. That is your name. Remember now. Think. I hope. She sat down at the foot of the bed and read the rest in silence. Every word trembled. Every sentence hurt. They say names are the last thing to go, that the soul holds on to them even when memory doesn't. But I feel mine slipping. I tried to write my name just now, and my hand refused. Not out of pain, out of doubt. What if I was never real? What if Elias is a lie I told myself so I wouldn't forget you? Nora's throat closed. She gripped the letter tighter, the paper crinkling beneath her fingers. This wasn't a letter of longing. It was a letter of unraveling. I'm being watched, not by the doctors anymore. They've stopped coming. Or maybe they were never here at all. But something else watches now. Shadows. They move in corners when I look away. They wear coats that flicker like film reel. Too fast, too smooth. They have no faces, only gazes. They don't speak. But I know what they want. They want you. They want to erase you. Scrub your name from my tongue. Burn your letters until the ashes don't remember their shape. Nora glanced toward the mirror above the fireplace. Her reflection stared back this time. But the eyes weren't hers. Just for a second. Last night, I opened a door in my dream. It wasn't mine. I shouldn't have been able to touch it. But the brass key you gave me in another life. It turned in the lock. Beyond it, clocks. Hundreds, thousands, floor to ceiling. All ticking backward. The walls were lined with memory. I saw your face in each pane of glass. But you weren't smiling. You were screaming. I walked deeper. The hallway never ended. My footsteps didn't echo. And then I saw a version of myself, younger, is clearer, holding a letter I hadn't written yet. He looked at me. He whispered, "She's close." Nora covered her mouth, because she had said those exact words aloud just days ago, alone in her apartment, reading one of his earlier letters. She's close. Had he heard her? Or remembered her remembering? The paper trembled as she continued. I fear I am being copied. There's another me walking these corridors now. He passes by my room but never enters. I see his shadow beneath the door, but it's wrong. His movements, they echo in reverse. He walks backwards, smiles without eyes, and writes, with your handwriting. Her chest tightened. Impossible. It had to be impossible. And yet, she remembered the ghost-like words bleeding through one of the earlier letters, in her own script, words she never wrote, or didn't remember writing. They don't want me to remember you, Nora. Because when I do, something shifts. The clocks falter, the lights dim, the fog thickens, and they can't find me. Your name is a map, Nora. Code, bell, a key. But it's growing faint. And the ink stopped, blot, then resumed shakier. I saw Margaret yesterday. or something wearing her skin. She sat at the foot of my bed and told me you never existed, that I had invented you after the crash, that no train derailed, that no platform ever vanished into mist. But I remember the cold of the metal, the crack of the wheels, the way the air split open like paper. I remember your voice saying my name through the fog. The last paragraph was scribbled, panic, words overlapping. Do not reply. Please, Nora. If you write back, they will trace it. They'll find you. You're still safe. Think. But they watch the ink. They read the paper. They smell memory like blood in the water. Don't reply. Don't write. And then, nothing. No signature. No date. Just a smear where the pen had dragged, as if he'd tried to finish a word and forgotten how. Nora stared at the letter for a long time. Long enough to feel the air grow heavy around her. Long enough to feel the fog seep in through the closed windows. She stood, slowly, cautiously, walked to her coat, reached into the pocket. Her breath caught. Inside something waited. A blank envelope and a fountain pen, carved with strange symbols along the barrel. Still warm. She pulled her hand away like it had been burned. She hadn't placed it there. She hadn't written anything. And yet, the envelope bore her name, her full name, in his handwriting, as if the letter she was warned not to write had already been sent, or was always going to be. There is a point in grief, real grief, where silence stops being a refuge and becomes unbearable. That's where Nora was now. She sat at the table, the fourth letter from Elias folded neatly beside the blank envelope and fountain pen she had found in her coat. Her hands hovered over the table, as if unsure which object to reach for, as if touching either might make everything collapse. He had told her not to write back. He had begged her, warned her, and yet her fingers itched. Her chest ached, and her throat burned with words that had never been spoken. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was absence, like a wound that didn't bleed but never stopped hurting. There was no logic to what she did next, only need. She uncapped the fountain pen. The ink was still wet, still dark, still waiting, as if the pen itself had known it would be used, and by whom. And she wrote, Dear Elias, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'm speaking to a man, a ghost, or a memory sewn into the cracks of time. But I remember you. Not clearly, not with images or moments, but with something deeper, a weight in my ribs, a breath I didn't know I was holding, a whisper at the edge of every silence. You've been with me before the letters, before the train, before the mirror. I see now. You were always the ache I couldn't name. Her hand trembled, but the pen glided effortlessly across the page. She kept going. They said you're forgetting yourself, that the shadows are stealing you piece by piece. I don't know how to stop them. I don't know how to reach you. But if there's even a thread left connecting us, I'll pull it. Because I'm not afraid of you, Elias. I'm afraid of never knowing what we were, what we might still be, and why it feels like I've lost something I never had. A tear slid down her cheek and splashed onto the page. The ink blurred slightly but didn't smear. The paper absorbed it, welcomed it. She wrote one final line. If you're still somewhere in the space between seconds, we'll wait. I'll find you. I swear it. Nora. She folded the letter, sealed the envelope, and without hesitation, she left her apartment. Outside, the fog had returned, thicker than before. It wrapped the city like a forgotten lullaby, soft and sad and smothering. Nora walked with purpose, to the library, to the restricted archives, to the exact shelf where she had found the very first letter. She slid the envelope between two books, just as before, and she waited. Not long, 'cause the next day it was gone. No wind, no shift, no trace, just absence, like the echo of a promise. That evening, Nora sat on the floor of her apartment, wrapped in a blanket, the window open to the fog, her body trembling with something she couldn't name. She had done what she wasn't supposed to do. And she felt it, not regret, but something heavier. She didn't cry at first. She just sat there, silent, listening, hoping. And then, as the clock struck 2:12 a.m., she wept. Not with logic, not with doubt, but with memory. Tears not shed for a stranger or a fantasy, but for a man who had once looked into her eyes across the impossible and called her by name. She didn't hear the knock at first. It was soft, once, then again. She froze. The letterbox on her apartment door had not creaked open. The hallway was always empty at this hour. She approached slowly, heart thundering. And there it was, an envelope, not from Elias. The handwriting was different. Precise, practiced, elegant in a colder way. She picked it up. It was sealed with wax, deep crimson, pressed with a symbol she hadn't seen before. Rose. Thorns etched along the petals. Nora opened it with shaking fingers. The letter inside was scented faintly with lavender and something else. Something sour. She began to read. Miss Callahan, you shouldn't have written back. This is not a warning. It is a courtesy. The last one you'll receive. He was not meant to remember you. Not fully. And you were never meant to reply. The threads that bind you have weight. They tug on the fabric of everything. He was safe in forgetfulness. You were safe in silence. You've ruined that now. Nora's fingers tightened around the paper. The signature at the bottom made her blood run cold. Margaret Thorne, wife of Elias, guardian of the veil. There was a postscript. Do not look for him again. He belongs to the shadows now. And the more you pull, the less of him remains. He was never yours. Nora lowered the letter. Her hands were cold, but her eyes were burning. Not from tears this time, but from something deeper, something sharp, something alive. Because in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. If Margaret was trying to keep her away, it meant Elias wasn't gone yet. The moment Nora finished reading Margaret's letter, the walls of her apartment seemed to pull farther away. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. It was something stranger, something quieter, like standing on a frozen lake and hearing a crack echo below your feet. Not loud, not immediate, but certain. Something had shifted. The world was no longer sitting still. The envelope that held Margaret's letter had turned cold in her hands. The wax seal had begun to crumble on its own, flaking into the shape of a withered rose. There was no return address, no stamp, no courier markings. It had come from nowhere, or everywhere. She read it again, slower this time. Tone was sharp, polished, but not cruel. Margaret Thorne hadn't written the letter with hatred. She had written it with certainty, the kind that doesn't leave room for debate. And the deeper Nora read, the more she realized this wasn't just a warning. It was a claim. You shouldn't have answered. You should have let him forget you. The moment you wrote back, you pulled him from the safety of silence. Do you understand what you've done? You think he's real. You believe he's reaching for you. But you're only hearing the part of him that remembers how to need. He was never well after the crash. Never whole. Something in him cracked with the steel, bent with the rail. When he came back, he spoke of things he'd never seen. Dreams that weren't his. And always you. The woman in the fog. Nora's hands tightened around the page. It felt like Margaret was speaking directly into her mind, the words vibrating in her chest rather than her ears. But there was no mistake. This wasn't Elias's voice. This was someone who had known him before the letters, before the mystery, before the unraveling. He would stare into the mirror for hours, the letter continued, as if waiting for someone to look back. He stopped sleeping. He stopped speaking except to call out for her. Always her. The woman he claimed he saw through the smoke, through the snow, on the platform. At first I thought it was grief, madness, a trick of trauma. But he began to change. He would wake with soot beneath his nails, train schedules drawn on his skin in ink. He spoke of platforms that didn't exist. Platform 6.5. Said it came when the fog was thick enough. I tried to help him. God knows I did. But he was already drifting. One memory at a time. Nora stood from the chair, her heart pounding. Because Elias had never said her name in the first letter. But she had been there. In his words, in his dreams, in his reaching. And now Margaret was painting her as a phantom. Not a woman, not a lover, but a symptom. The letter went on. One night he vanished. April 2nd, 1901. He said he heard her again, your voice, whispering through the storm. He packed a small bag, said he had to follow it, that it would take him to where time folded back. We never found him, just his coat, and the scent of smoke. Nora could barely breathe now. Everything she had come to believe was unraveling. And yet somehow, the unraveling itself proved the truth. If Margaret had loved him, why warn her now? If Elias had truly lost himself, why were the letters growing more lucid, more vivid, not less? And why had Nora always known she'd been waiting for someone? Even before the first envelope fell, she turned back to the final part of the letter, the section written in heavier ink, as if Margaret had pressed harder, as if her words were not just warnings but laws. You believe in fate. He believes in memory. But memory is a lie the dead whisper into silence to keep from disappearing. You've been chosen because you still listen. But make no mistake, Nora Callahan. He will bring you with him if you let him. The last line echoed through the room like thunder spoken beneath breath. She stared at it, unable to move. Her reflection in the window trembled slightly. Not from movement, but distortion. Like the glass couldn't decide which version of her to reflect. And then something happened. Something that should have been impossible. The letter began to warm in her hands. Faintly, softly, as if someone was breathing against her fingertips from the other side of the page. She dropped it, and it didn't hit the floor. It vanished in midair, like smoke rising in reverse. No ash, no scent, only silence. She sat on the floor for a long time after that, watching the shadows move, not from light, but from memory. And then, without understanding why, she opened the drawer of her desk, the one where she kept the first letter, and there it was. Another envelope, not sealed, no name. Inside, one slip of paper. No handwriting, just type, black ink, entered, midnight, 2 nights from now. Platform 6.5 will appear. Board the train. Or don't. But once it leaves, it won't come again. It had been exactly 50 years, to the day, the night Elias Thorne vanished from the records. The night Margaret said he followed a voice into the fog and was never seen again. The night a man, broken, haunted, forgotten, walked toward something no one else believed existed. And now, the fog had returned, drenched in silver light that spilled across the city like memory made visible. The streets were quieter than usual, though no one had announced a curfew. The air tasted like metal and ash, like something long buried had risen to breathe again. Nora stood at the edge of the old rail yard. A single line of words replayed in her mind. Board the train. Or don't. The note had vanished from her drawer just hours after she found it, as if its job was only to be read, not remembered. But she remembered. She hadn't brought her phone. She hadn't brought anything, in fact. Not even a coat. Just a slip of brass in her palm. Key. Still warm. Still engraved with one word. Remember. She walked slowly, deliberately, past the broken signage and rusted fences, into the sleeping ruins of what was once a gateway for thousands. And then silence. Not quiet, but the kind of silence that makes the skin ache. That presses against the ribs and says, something is listening. She stepped onto the stone foundation. Platform 6.5. This time it wasn't empty. A single lantern flickered on a bent iron post, casting a soft golden circle across the cracked stone. Shadows danced around it. The fog pulsed in rhythm. And then, from the distance, so faint she thought it might be imagined, came a sound that did not belong to this time. Train whistle. Low, hollow, mournful. Didn't scream. Call. The ground began to tremble, softly at first, like the heartbeat of the world waking up beneath her feet. Nora turned toward the tracks, or rather where the tracks used to be. And out of the mist, out of the colorless nothing, came light. A glow. Shifting. Faint. And then it appeared. Train. Shimmering. Not rusted or broken or old, but impossible. It glided along rails that weren't there. Wheels spinning without sound. Powered by something no engineer had ever named. Its shape was both modern and ancient. Copper bones with silver skin. Glass windows fogged from the inside as if it had traveled through more than just air. As it drew closer, time seemed to bend around it. The lantern beside her flickered once. Then burst. Total darkness. Except for the glow of the train. It didn't slow. It didn't stop. It moved with the grace of a thing not bound by physics. And inside, seated at the front window, was a man. Alone. Nora stepped forward. And in that moment everything else vanished. No sound. No city. No fear. Just him. His face was pale but not ghostly. His hair was longer now. Darker at the roots, streaked with ash at the temples. He wore a coat too fine for the era, but too old for the modern world. And his eyes, they were the same. Tired. Searching. Elias. She moved closer to the edge of the platform. The train passed by like a dream she wasn't sure she had earned. His eyes met hers. And he didn't smile. He simply nodded, slowly, as if to say, "You made it." Then he lifted one hand, pressed it against the glass, and mouthed a single word. "Come." The doors didn't open. They didn't need to. Because even as the train continued to glide forward, one door, directly beside her, creaked wide, revealing not a platform interior, but a narrow passage glowing gold. She looked inside, and saw nothing familiar. No seats, no passengers, just corridors wrapped in soft velvet shadows and walls pulsing faintly, like lungs made of light. Nora's heart beat once, then again. Then she stepped forward. But before her foot crossed the threshold, a sound echoed behind her. Voice. "Don't." He turned. But no one was there. Just fog. And memory. And maybe, just maybe, the last tether holding her to the life she used to know. The voice hadn't been Elias's. It had been hers. A younger version. Tired. Lonely. Begging. But she stepped forward anyway. Because love, when it calls across time, does not whisper. It rings. And some part of her, the part that had always waited without knowing what she was waiting for, knew this wasn't a mistake. It was a return. The moment she stepped inside, the door closed behind her without sound. The train never stopped. But it had welcomed her. And far ahead, in the fogged windows of the lead car, Elias sat still, waiting. The train vanished into the mist, and platform 6.5 vanished with it. The first step inside the train felt like stepping into a memory that didn't belong to her. The air was thick, not with smoke or dust, but with history. Like every second ever lost or stolen now floated just above the velvet carpet beneath her feet. The walls pulsed with warmth, not from electricity, but something older, something quieter. A heartbeat made of silence. And the corridor didn't follow logic. It twisted, split, folded. One moment it held the gleam of polished mahogany panels and golden sconces that flickered like gaslight from a Victorian estate. The next, it buzzed with soft fluorescent hums, casting sterile reflections off white walls that looked like the corridors of a mid-century hospital. Then again, shadows of metal ribs, curved like the inner hull of a submarine, blinked past her as she walked. Each section of the train seemed torn from a different time. And yet, it all fit together, as if the train wasn't moving through space, but through when. She moved forward slowly, following the strange rhythm of flickering lights, passing compartments filled with ghost-quiet nothing. No passengers, no sound, only atmosphere, only the scent of lavender and metal. until she saw him, Elias, sitting alone in a carriage that looked like it belonged in a 19th century ballroom. Velvet seats, brass lanterns, windows so fogged they blurred the outside into pure gray. He stared through them, lost in a world that only he could see. He didn't turn as she entered, didn't speak. Nora stepped forward, closer, her voice caught in her throat. Then she whispered, "Elias." He blinked, slowly, his head turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment there was nothing, just stillness. He looked through her, past her, like someone waking from a long, long sleep. Then his eyes changed. They widened, toughened, and filled with something so deep, so raw, so unbearably human that her knees almost gave out. His lips parted, and he whispered, "I thought you were just a dream." She moved to him, but he didn't rise. He sat frozen, eyes locked to hers. Tears welled. He smiled, small, cracked, trembling. "You're real." His hand reached out. She took it. Touch was warm, not the chill of a ghost, not the burn of something divine, just warm, alive. And suddenly, the train didn't feel so silent anymore. There was music in the walls, not played but remembered. A slow, echoing melody, like a lullaby hummed by time itself. He looked at her again, still holding her hand. "I was afraid to hope." She sat beside him, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been written across the edges of every letter, every sleepless night, every line of ghost ink spilled between their worlds. And then, something called to her. Not a sound. Pull. Her eyes drifted toward the front of the cabin. An alcove, dimly lit, a single pedestal, and on it, a book. She stood, drawn to it. Elias didn't stop her. He only watched, as if he already knew what she'd find. The book was thick, bound in leather so old it looked cracked from within. Its spine was sealed by 3 metal clasps, but as she touched it, they clicked open without resistance. The cover peeled back like it had been waiting, and inside, list, register. Some she recognized, but only faintly, as if from childhood history lessons or deep-buried news clippings. Others meant nothing, all written in faded, curling ink. Some pages were in English, others in languages she couldn't name. One looked like it had been scratched with bone. Another burned into the parchment with what looked like ash. She flipped further. Dozens of pages. Hundreds. Every name had a date beside it. The first stretched back to 1723. The last. She stopped breathing. There it was. Name. Nora Callahan. Dated. Damp. The day she found the first letter. Her hands began to shake. She turned to Elias, barely managing the words. "What is this?" His voice was quiet. The ones who remember." She looked back at the page, and beneath her name, space. Thin line. Still empty. Waiting. Elias stood and walked slowly to her side. He didn't look at the book, only at her. Everyone on this train disappeared without explanation. Some stepped through mirrors. Some vanished in fog. Some followed whispers down alleys that no longer exist. And some, like you, answered a letter. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "Is this death?" He shook his head, gently. "No, this is the pause between it. This is where stories wait." She swallowed, the pain in her chest sharp and deep, because now she understood. Every letter was never meant to find her. It was meant to return her, to where she'd always been going. He looked down at the page again. "The book knew your name before I remembered it. You were always meant to be here, even before I found you." And yet, one question still burned. "Why?" she asked. "Why us?" Elias exhaled, and his voice cracked. "Because we tried to love outside of time. And time does not forgive that." She felt herself fall forward, the world spinning beneath the weight of that truth. He caught her, held her, and whispered one last thing into her ear before the lights above them flickered. "We are not passengers. We are the memory of what could have been. Outside, the fog grew darker, and the train began to slow, just slightly. The next stop was coming, but it wasn't on any map, and neither of them knew what it would reveal. Yet Nora turned one last page, to the final blank space in the register, and saw something else, written in a hand not her own. One line, fresh ink, still drying. She will stay. Dear reader, if you're hearing this, it means the veil has thinned for you too. That quiet place between seconds has opened, and you've stepped close enough to feel what most people spend their lives forgetting. I'm writing from a place that doesn't exist on any map. A corridor stitched from memory and mist. A train that runs between worlds that no longer agree on what year it is. A kind of nowhere. Moving always forward but never really leaving. This is where I am now. This is where I write to you from. Train. I know that sounds impossible. I know you're questioning everything, the logic, the timeline, the sanity. But if you've come this far, if you're still listening, then something inside you already knows. You felt it. Maybe in a dream you couldn't explain. Maybe in the shiver when you passed a mirror that didn't reflect quite right. Or the moment you heard your name whispered on a street where no one stood. Whatever brought you here, whatever thread you followed, welcome. You're part of the story now. And stories, once remembered, never really end. I don't regret stepping aboard. Thought I would. There was a moment, just before the door closed behind me, where I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood what it meant. This wasn't a rescue. This was a reunion. It was always meant to be him. Elias, even if we only ever met in letters. Even if the world had to bend and break and forget itself just to give us this moment. He doesn't sleep much. Neither do I. The train moves in pulses. Sometimes the stars outside the windows look familiar. Other times, I swear I see the shadow of a city I'll never walk again. We pass through memories more than landscapes. And the passengers, they don't speak, but they feel. I sit beside him now. Sometimes our hands brush in the dark and we don't even need to look at each other. We already know. The weight of 1,000 unsent letters lives between us. And yet we are light, 'cause we remember. And remembering is more powerful than any map, any clock, any wall time ever tried to build around us. We found each other in the silence. And in that silence, something else was born. Message, truth, a warning maybe, or an invitation. You see, I didn't just write this letter to tell you where I went. I wrote it because you're next. No, not in the way Margaret might have meant. She feared memory. She feared what we awaken when we love outside the rules of time. But I think maybe we weren't breaking the rules. Maybe we were remembering the ones that came before. There are names in the passenger book. Hundreds of them. People who vanished from newspapers, search parties, families. Most of them forgotten. But not here. Here they breathe again. In memory. In ink. In the folds of this train's walls. Some call this limbo. Others call it fate. I don't pretend to know which one is true. But I know this. If this letter found you, it's because the veil has started to lift. And that means one thing. There's something you need to remember. Something or someone who hasn't let go of you. Maybe they've written before. Maybe their letters got lost between dream and daylight. Maybe they've whispered through old music, familiar smells, a strange shadow at 3 a.m. Or maybe, like Elias, they're waiting just beyond the fog, where the tracks disappear. I know what this sounds like. I know what you must be thinking. But I promise you, every impossible thing I've told you is true. And this isn't goodbye. In fact, this is only the beginning. Because once you hear the train whistle, once you see your name on paper you never wrote, once you find something in your pocket that doesn't belong to this hour, this place, this life, you won't be able to unremember. And when that moment comes, when the air thickens and the silence begins to hum, when time folds like the edge of a well-worn letter, don't be afraid. You're not alone. We're still here, still writing, still waiting, for you, always for you. There's one last thing I have to give you. Return address. I found it written on the back of a letter that hadn't been sent yet, and I recognized it, 'cause it was yours. Worse, don't ask how I know. Somewhere along the way, time stopped asking for permission. You'll find the envelope. You'll know what to do. And when you reply, when you finally write the words that have been echoing inside your chest since the first time you almost remembered, we'll be here. The door will open, and someone, maybe Elias, maybe me, maybe a version of yourself you've forgotten, will whisper, "Answer me." And then, knock at your door. Just one. Final. Familiar. The sound of a train whistle. Distant, fading, returning. The past isn't gone. It's just waiting to be read. And now, it's your turn. And so, the letter finds you now. Not by accident, but because it was always meant to. Forgotten train. A name written before it was remembered. Two souls bound by something stronger than time itself. Longing. If this tale whispered to something deep inside you, if you felt the fog, heard the whistle, or imagined a name once lost to memory, then you're one of us. Here every story leaves an echo, every silence hides a truth, and every subscriber, another traveler on the tracks. There are more doors to open, more voices waiting to be heard, more impossible love stories written in ink that never fades. So if you're still listening, answer back. Come in. Share this with someone who needs to remember. And most of all, subscribe. Because the next story may already be on its way. And some letters don't wait. We'll see you at the next station.